Well, one of the problems with democracy is sometimes it leads to democracy. Now, I'm a deep defender of the idea that people shouldn't have things done to them that they didn't vote on, and that's a problem. Um, the In any democracy, any true democracy, as they would say, 50% plus one can decide to disenfranchise or steal the property of or otherwise abuse people who are in the minority. Just think in the 1910s, if the vote had come up as to whether or not the descendants of the ex-slaves should be able to vote, I'm reasonably certain that that vote would have been no. The descendants of ex-slaves would have been disenfranchised even more than they already were. So one of the dangers of democracy is you have to control it. You have to the fires of democracy, you have to somehow or another contain and get the heat without the flame. So, it would be nice if you had if this, this is a picture by Norman Rockwell. It'd be nice if, of course, everything was nice and pretty like this, a community, coming together and making decisions. I'm all for this, goodness knows. Lots of places, I happen to live in one, actually function this way very nicely. But if there's a proposal on the ballot which essentially does damage to another group, and people vote for it, then democracy has had its day, and the majority has decided that this group over here, needs to have something taken away from them, or something needs to happen to them. You just don't want to do this. The founders, who had certainly seen mobs in action, in fact, a number of the founders had encouraged mobs to do things. You don't really want to have mob law and mob rule and all that type of thing. And if you do, then, you may be the one that gets caught next in it. So you need to kind of sit down and think about, was this how much power you want mobs to have? Certainly the founders had seen what mobs could do. As I say, some of them encouraged them. You probably want to rethink that one. The rule of law is not such a bad idea, and mob law is a bad idea. And just in things like this, one of the problems with democracy is, of course, is you can vote to make your money cheap. So let's say you buy a car for $25,000. You vote to cut the value of money in half, issuing just scads of money. Well, now $25,000, you're buying a car for $25,000. Suddenly, it only takes, in reality, $12,500 because you can pay it off in cheap money. Well, in one state, Rhode Island, during the time of the Constitutional Convention, creditors literally fled the state of Rhode Island so that their debtors couldn't pay them off in cheap money. That's chaos. You don't want to do that. And certainly the founders were well aware of this. Well, they had Rhode Island as an example. But suppose maybe you need someone to say, no, bad law, or you're oppressing a minority. Well, somebody, the English king used to practice what was called disallowance. And that is that after the law was passed, the king had 5 years in which he, in this case, George III, could disallow a law. Do you really want to go back to living under that authority like that, where one person can just go and disallow a law that's been on the books for 3 years? That's chaos too. And also, I don't like being told what to do, and I'll make a bet you don't either. And so, the idea of going back to some kind of kingship disallowance probably wasn't going to sell. The state legislative houses oftentimes responded, saying, state representatives and state senators are really very close to the people. And oftentimes they represent some of the worst instincts of the people because it gets votes. It helps you in primaries. Sometimes it helps you in general election by scaring people or by making this person hate that person, and you know, or just appealing to people's baser instincts. And the founders were very much aware of the fact that state assemblies created problems, and that something had to be done about that. And then there's the state courts. Well, state courts oftentimes are composed of, truthfully, not bad people, not uneducated people, but maybe second tier people or third tier people. And they oftentimes are very close to the mob, and or oftentimes rule in favor of this person or that person because there's a association which they are aware of. And as the saying goes, the courts follow the voting ballots. So no court wants to get in trouble with the voters, and therefore, as a result, they tend to follow the voters. So after all of this debate over how to disallow state laws, it turns out that they can't really, that the members of the Constitutional Convention could not really come to have full disallowance where the Congress can just go, you're gone. That law's out of here, gone. They just couldn't do it. First off, many of them represent states, all of them represent states, but some of them had really tight ties to their states. And of course, you weren't going to give the king, or not the king, but the president or the executive council, the rule to do that. That's too close to monarchy. But probably the most anti-government person in the convention, Luther Martin, a guy brilliant guy, great orator, fine legal mind, not too fond of alcohol. But of all people, he stands up and basically says that the United States government can disallow laws, state laws, and boy, and you would think, well, if this guy who's so anti-government wants a federal government strong enough, or a national government strong enough that it can disallow state laws, that must be good. But there's a problem. I told you, Luther Martin's a very smart guy. He's very shrewd. His motion, which people didn't get immediately, was framed in such a way that the federal government could strike down state laws, but not state constitutions. And you could put any damn thing you want in a state and a constitution. And so basically, Luther Martin, clever guy, came up with this way of getting around the authority of national government. This, after some debate, followed by the name of William Samuel Johnson, a great judge, very, very learned judge, very thoughtful judge, who happens to be a member of the delegation from Connecticut, steps up and says, no. Essentially, he comes up with a fairly clever phrase that essentially problems that arise at the state level in violation or in potential violation of the national constitution is settled at the federal level. And that shifts these problems to federal courts, which are, of course, sworn to uphold the U.S. Constitution. Johnson was as clever as Martin, and essentially Martin opened the door for Johnson to put this in, and that's what eventually is going to rise up. Problems that arise under the U.S. Constitution, basically belong in federal court. Well, and state courts are sworn to uphold the federal courts. That raises a question, though, of what happens if what does it mean if there's a problem? How can you prove that something comes under the US Constitution. So you're not disallowing state laws. You're not disallowing state constitutions. You're saying if there's a problem, that then it goes to federal courts. Okay, and notice, by the way, that Congress is no longer part of this. So it was a clever move on Johnson's part, and it does get things into federal courts which might not otherwise have gotten there. The Supremacy Clause, as it's called, is this Constitution and the laws of the United States which shall be made in pursuance thereof, and all treaties made, shall be the supreme law of the land. No question about this. And the judges in every state, notice that, in every state, shall be bound thereby. Anything in the Constitution of laws of any state notwithstanding. So that pushes Luther Martin to one side, because now state constitutions, they come under the U.S. Constitution. And so the U.S. Constitution and treaties made thereof, thereby, really do trump state law and state constitution. But it goes back to the question of what actually comes under the Constitution. Well, who makes that decision? Who makes the decision that there's something that comes under the Constitution or a treaty? And so there's a case in 1803, Marbury versus Madison. And what happened was John Adams made a lot of last-minute appointments on his way to office. He leaves office in 1801. The Secretary of State is the person who actually issues the documents that put you into office. Thomas Jefferson wins the election of 1800. James Madison is the Secretary of State. Madison refuses to issue some documents relating to these last-minute appointments. They're called the midnight appointments. So Marbury, who was appointed to a position, doesn't get a certification, and he sues Madison. That makes sense. And Madison refused to hand it over. It rises to the Supreme Court. And the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, John Marshall, says that it is emphatically the position, the province of the federal court system and of course the Supreme Court to say what the law says, and that would be also what the Constitution says. So with this court decision, a very important decision, Marbury versus Madison, with this court decision, it is, and which is agreed to by almost everybody, becomes emphatically the position that the courts make the decision. Now, there's still room in this for considerable debate, and just as an example, Abraham Lincoln argues fairly strongly against John Marshall's rather stern and maybe even extreme position. And of course, whether or not presidents and other people have disobeyed the Supreme Court from time to time, but by and large, we tend to leave it up to the courts to say, one, what the law is, and two, what the Constitution is, and what falls under the law and what falls under the Constitution. So I guess they did save democracy from democracy. I never quite know exactly how I feel about these things, because certainly it's a major problem. And we've had all kinds of things come under the U.S. Constitution. Just as an example, we have had there was a court case back about a century ago on migrating birds, and so what the heck? Why not? If you can certainly do migrating birds, see where it goes from there. Well, to everybody out there, stay safe, stay healthy. And in this crazy period of time, you might want to think about keeping your head about you. Okay. So take care, everybody. Bye-bye.